Hello everybody, it's Sarah, and I hate to say this, but I'm gonna try to get through this video as fast as possible because it is currently 35 degrees outside. It's 30 degrees inside. I do have two ventilators, however, I had to turn them off for this video and I turned them off like 2 seconds ago and I'm already starting sweating so much. It is so fucking hot. It's gonna be 40 degrees this weekend. I hate my life, but I do not hate this video. This video, in fact, is the video that I look forward to filming the most each year. It is my Pride recommendations video. Generally speaking, of course, talking about science fiction and fantasy novels. And I also do quite like, even though it's mostly due to, you know, laziness and procrastination, that I only ever get around to filming this video at the end of Pride month, because that way I can sit down and encourage you to read queer books, not just during 1 month in the year, but as with all history months, try and read books from authors of all walks of life during the entire year, you know? Anyway, let's get into my queer SFF recommendations. As always, just a quick summary of what I count as a queer book. A queer book is a book by an author that is queer. A queer book is a book with a main character that is queer. It does not have to mean that the relationship can't be heterosexual. However, if at least one of the main characters is very obviously queer, it's a queer book. Or a queer book is a book where just like the entire world building and the entire writing is just like so casually queer that I count it as that. And I will also, if I remember at all, tell you exactly in which category each of these books fall that I will talk about. I just like roughly collected 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books. And as always, these are books where it's not necessarily that I loved all of them or gave all of them 4+ stars. Some of them, in fact, I gave below 3 stars. However, that is mostly due to personal preferences, and I think with queerness especially, or with queer books, with marginalized authors, it's incredibly important to just, you know, showcase those types of books anyway, because maybe some of you, they will be up your alley. So yeah, let's get into it. And I'm actually gonna finish with my 3 5-star books this year. Let's just start with some books that I read last year. First, a book that I'm sure a lot of you will have heard about before. It's The Isle in the Silver Sea by Tasha Suri. This is a standalone romantic fantasy set in this world that is kind of created by stories. So there is people in this world who essentially are archetypical heroes. Like, they really just encompass the essence of a specific story, and so because of that, their life, the way their life will play out, is following that story after a certain point comes in their life, after like an initial inciting incident in their life or whatever, and then usually they die quite soon. They come around at some point again, like they are reborn, and then they play out that story again. And so we follow our 2 main characters, who are 2 such characters, like archetypical heroes. They are the witch and the knight, and essentially what their story is they are doomed to kill each other in every life. However, in this life, they want to try and not do that, but if they don't do that, that might lead to some other stuff happening. And so it's basically a story centering the 2 of them, but also very much a book about stories and about the importance of stories for nation building also, which is something that I very, very much enjoyed. There were some elements in this that I didn't enjoy quite as much. I do think that there were some like tone inconsistencies that I personally had with the book. However, in the way that it treated storytelling, I really, really appreciated this. I also wasn't opposed to the romance, which is a surprise for me, as I'm usually quite lackluster about a lot of romances and romantic fantasies. So yeah, but definitely a queer recommendation. And also obviously one of the Lady Night books, like one of the many books that were talked about as Lady Night books last year. Which, by the way, I know this is off topic, but I hate when I see the Knight and the Moth on there, because our main character in The Knight and the Moth is not a Lady Knight. Yeah, she gets armor at some point. She's not a Lady Knight. Anyway, next is a book that I personally didn't enjoy. I, in fact, gave it below 3 stars, I think. And that is A Song of Legends Lost by M.H. Allende. I forgot what the series is called, but this is the first book in a series. However, I do think that I can put this on there because we did buddy read this also for my book club of Queens, Witches and Valkyries, which is all about reading adult fantasy written by women and queer folks. And I remember that I was like one of the only ones who had a bad opinion on this. Almost everyone else enjoyed this. So I do think it's more a personal thing where I personally didn't enjoy. Like, there were a lot of characters in this book, which I don't mind necessarily, but I did not prefer the way the characters were introduced and how split up a lot of the characters were. If we have multiple POV fantasies, I do prefer if we like start out narrowing more on a smaller part of the story first and then branch out. And that wasn't the case in this book. Otherwise, however, it's kind of hard. This is one of those books that's very hard to describe because it's essentially an epic scope fantasy. Also, once again, where we do follow very different characters, where it is not clear off the bat how their stories are connected, which makes summing up the story quite difficult. But we follow a bunch of different characters who seem to be chosen, I would say, in some way. I cannot tell you exactly how this is queer, quote unquote, because this is one of those fantasy books that are just like full of a plethora of different queer identities, where the world building all in all is just incredibly queer. I do believe a couple of our main characters or POV characters are queer also, if I remember correctly. And so yeah, if you're looking for like another epic scope fantasy series to get into, I do think this one is worth trying out, even though I personally, you know, didn't fully enjoy it when I read it. However, I do still think that I will try and pick up book 2 at some point. But yeah, we'll see if I can even find it, because I don't think I want to buy the second book, but I don't think my library will have it. Next we have another romantic fantasy, and that is A Treachery of Swans by A.B. Poranek. This is a queer retelling of Swan Lake, however, with like everything that comes with a queer retelling. Maybe it's not necessarily a queer retelling, maybe it's like more a book inspired by the Swan Lake that also does follow more so, you know, the storyline. However, there's like broader world building than there is in the original story, if that makes sense. And the romance in this one is between Odile and Odette. So yeah, no prince there, sorry. I mean, there is a prince, but like not within the romance is what I mean. And the two of them were childhood friends. However, Odette feels for some reason that she has been betrayed by Odile, I think, if I remember correctly, in her youth. And now the two of them meet again, and Odette is trying to help her, like, kind of foster father, I should say, like the person who took her in, who is obviously the like big evil magician guy from Swan Lake, who I forgot the name of. And there's also, once again, other stuff going on, because within this world, magic is outlawed. It's like, I enjoyed A.B. Poranek's other book more than I did this one. However, I still did give this 4 stars, and I really especially enjoyed the ending of it. However, the ending also kind of made me disappointed with the rest of the book, because the ending was written like incredibly beautifully, and I would have loved the narration of the ending more like pulled throughout the book. However, if that is not something that you will mind, which I guess you won't be able to tell. As I said, it's a really quick and easy read. It's a standalone, and I do think that A.B. Poranek, with this book, with how much I enjoyed it, has become an author that I will, you know, at least try and check out their new stuff and see if it's something that I will be interested in, even though she's not an auto-buy author. I do notice that there's a lot of Illumicrate in here. However, that was like my 3 Illumicrate editions that I had. Next, we have a singular YA story on here, and that is Hazelthorn by C.G. Drews. Last year I talked about Don't Let the Forest In. I did enjoy Don't Let the Forest In more, so I would say if you haven't read C.G. Drews yet, start with Hazelthorn, then go to Don't Let the Forest In, because I think it's like slightly better. However, Hazelthorn was still really amazing. It follows our main character, who is called Evander. And Evander has like these kind of lapses. He doesn't really know what's going on, but all throughout his life he has been in and out of hospital, and he's essentially very, very sick, and he lives in this big manor house and is not allowed to leave the house, and is deathly scared of the gardens of the house. And so one day the owner of the house, who has raised Evander, dies mysteriously, and Evander believes that the grandson of the owner, whom he has hated since his youth, since childhood, was the one who killed the grandfather. And at the same time, the grandson is the only one he kind of is able to work together with to get behind the mystery of how the grandfather died. And so yeah, C.G. Drews is a trans author. So I forgot where I was because I was baking bread and it was done. But yeah, Hazelthorn, obviously the 2 main characters, well, the main character Evander and the grandson, do feel strangely drawn to each other. So this is a gay story also. And then the author also, I believe, is autistic. And so there's a lot of those experiences kind of baked into the story as well. But yeah, absolutely love C.G. Drews. I am so excited for both of his new books that are coming out this year. Like, there's his adult debut and then also another YA release coming. Next, we have another adult epic fantasy story, and that is The Mercy Makers by Tessa Gretton. Tessa Gretton is once again also a genderqueer author, and they write a lot of just like queer as fuck stories where it doesn't even really matter to talk about what the specific types of queerness are that are in the books, because everything is just queer as fuck. In this one we follow Irisat, who is just known as Silk. Basically, she does a type of magic, or like a specific subset of the magic within this world that is outlawed, and also she is like the magician type person for the biggest crime underground conglomerate within this world. And so when this conglomerate is betrayed, she is then taken in by the royal family and by the leaders of this country, of this world, empire, whatever you want to call it. I forgot what it was exactly, I have to be honest. It's been a year since I read this. And she has to help them while also trying to follow her own motivations and kind of just like do her own thing. And so she gets drawn into the politics of this world. And this story I found incredibly interesting, and I enjoyed it like a lot, mainly because there are a lot of like undertones of social justice within this story, where you have these laws and this system of nobility in place that oppresses a lot of people. However, while our main character, while Irisat is aware of all of that, she does not necessarily personally care. She only cares insofar as how a lot of the stuff that she wants to do and her personal motivations are also hindered by the same stuff, by the same system that oppresses the people. And so that's why she's against the system, essentially. And I just found it such an interesting story. There's also a very big romantic subplot that I cared about in some parts, didn't care as much about in other parts. Irisette also is bisexual and queer. There's a lot of queerness in here. There's also, if I remember correctly, a lot of talk about like trans characters, because stuff that Irisette isn't allowed to do is use her magic to change bodies. And so that like kind of goes into a lot of medicine stuff. And so she like wants to do everything that is possible to do with magic. And so she uses the argument of medicine a lot of times to like, hey, if we were allowed to do this, we could do a lot of good. However, she doesn't really necessarily mainly care about doing good. She more so cares about not being limited in what she can do with her magic. But yeah, Tessa Gretton is one of my favorite authors. Pretty much an auto-buy author by now. The second book has come out already in this series. However, I have not gotten around to buying it yet. So, but that has to happen soon as well. And now let's go on to my 3 5-star books that I had so far this year, which all of them I would say are some level of queer. I have not had a great reading time so far this year. I've had a lot of slumps, but yeah. 3 books were 5 stars, all of them were queer, so let's talk about them. The first one I would say is probably the least queer, and it's probably the one that a lot of people maybe wouldn't put on their queer lists. However, with the way I count those books, I would. And that is The Girl with a Thousand Faces by Sun Yi Dean. This one is Sun Yi Dean's second published novel, I believe. The first one was The Book Eaters, which was also a sapphic story. I have not been able to find out if Sun Yi Dean is queer or not. However, not gonna lie, I would just assume, just from the way that she writes books and from the way their stories are written, because there is queerness everywhere in those stories. There is more like out queer characters than out heterosexual characters, I would say. Like, the only reason why characters would not be assumed queer is that if you don't have more information, you just automatically assume they are not queer, which I personally do not subscribe to. And The Girl with a Thousand Faces follows Mercy, who is a ghost talker, basically. She's able to talk to ghosts. She is over 50 years by now, and she works for the Triad in like this kind of underground city in Hong Kong, or like somewhat, I'm not sure if I would call it a slum, it's not, but it's like this walled off part of Hong Kong that is kind of constantly in danger of being, you know, just becoming the next development project, basically. And within this city, there is a lot of ghosts. Essentially, in this world, ghosts are just like almost part of everyday life, or not this world, in this alternate reality. And Mercy can talk to ghosts, and she basically does that for this Triad. And then it turns out there's a new ghost running around and just killing people by drowning them. And so Mercy has to find out what exactly is happening, because if not, then her like city part once again will be destroyed. Mercy herself, I would say, is not necessarily queer or not queer. That's because Mercy's identity in terms of gender and in terms of sexuality does not really play a role within the story. However, as I said, the reason why I would put this on this list is because just like among the side characters, there's just so much queerness. There's trans characters, there's lesbian characters, there's just a lot of different identities within the story, and so that's why I wanted to talk about it. Also because I gave it 5 stars, so I needed an excuse. The next one is my first 5-star read of the year, and that was Vagabonds by Elogosa Osunde. They are, like, I believe in this story, they're still within the author name, like, description, they're still she, her pronouns. However, since then, at least on social media, they have been updated to they, them pronouns. So Elogosa Osunde is a genderqueer author and also a Nigerian author. And this story, Vagabonds, is a series of small vignettes of different people living within Lagos like I think it's all of them, living in Lagos, and all of them are queer, and how that queerness interacts with society in Lagos and with problems but also with joy. And it's an amazing book. It's an amazing story. It's written so well. I read it with the Quarterly Crit Club, which for those of you who don't know is Scylla and Steph. And we also did a whole discussion, so I'll leave that down below. Also, by the way, on the topic also of queer books, the next one we'll read is in July, and it's The City in Glass by Nebo, which is also a queer author, and which is a book that I talked about previously in another queer recommendations video. Anyway, back to this one. This is just magical realism at its finest, at its best. You're never really sure if something is truly magical or if something is just symbolism and metaphor, or other like literary devices. And it's about queer pain, it's about queer joy, it's about queer experiences, in a setting that is different than a lot of, you know, the typically Western settings that we read within the Anglophone publishing market, I would say. So yeah, definitely go and pick this up. Like, if you take away any of the books from this video, pick this one. Like, if you don't know which one to choose, 100% this one. And then the last book I want to talk about is a book that is not technically published yet. It will come out on the 14th of July, and it's The Eye of Leviathan by M.A. Carrick, who of course wrote my favorite series of all time, Rook and Rose, which I, by the way, find it so unfair that this book, on Storygraph at least, is not tagged as LGBT, because it very much is. One of our main character, not Evander, with Hazel Thornsdale, Esteban, that's what it was. It's the E and the V, that's why I was confused. Esteban is a fairy who literally doesn't care about what his gender is. He currently is male because that is the role that he takes within the story. However, in the past he has had female bodies, or has shown himself as female, as male, whatever. It doesn't really matter to him. And also, as concerning the body that he is in right now, he is gay, so like his main love interest, who doesn't appear a lot in the story, is a man also. But what is the story about? This is historical fantasy set around 1600 in Spain, and after having gotten a fuck ton of silver from the New World, Spain basically decides to also try and conquer and colonize the sea beyond, which is the realm of the fairies. And so we follow two characters. One of them is Esteban, who has come to Spain as a changeling to try and find a way to stop the colonization of the sea beyond. And the other one is Hungry Girl, who basically is the human who has gone to the sea beyond, as the counterpart of Esteban. You know, changeling, a fairy comes to our world and then a human goes to the other world, and that whole thing. And so yeah, once again, like, M.A. Carrick just are masters of queer as fuck world building. I don't know how else to call it. Also, one of the author duo, Alice Helms, identifies as queer. Also, I'm not sure about Marie Brennan, to be honest. However, Alice Helms at least identifies as queer. Esteban is gay and genderqueer within the story. So yeah, there's just a plethora of all different things. I will also have a review of this up soon, because I obviously have an arc. That's what this is. This is why it's white. It's not that's not the finished copy. And also I will get around to interviewing Alice Helms and Marie Brennan this weekend, I believe, which means that probably I will have interviewed them by the time you see this video. However, I will not yet have uploaded the video or the review for the book. So yeah, also this is the first book in a duology, if I haven't said that yet, which I probably haven't. But yeah, with all of that, I really need to be done with this video because I am so fucking hot. There's like this sound on TikTok, which I think is like an Austrian or German sound, which translated is like, I'm sweating like a prostitute in a church. It's so fucking hot. So yeah, that's that's what's going on right now. So tell me in the comments down below if you're interested in picking any of these books up. What were your favorite queer books that you read in the past year? And as always, all the links will be left to all my book clubs and my social media and everything down below. And with all of that, I hope I'll see you soon. Bye!